I ask this question genuinely and with an open mind. Does President-elect Donald Trump's proposed administration have a multiple personality disorder? I ask the question because I'm finding it harder and harder to get a sense of what Trump is going to try and achieve. I continue to wait and see and to hope for the best, but have begun to wonder. For one thing, having campaigned, and it feels so very long ago now, on the promise of making peace in Ukraine, ending the killing overnight with a couple of phone calls, as it were, some of the loudest voices close to him, apparently, we're invited to think, speaking with his blessing, have recently sounded about as bloodthirsty and bellicose as anyone serving the outgoing Joe Biden. Mike Waltz, Trump's nominee for National Security Advisor, has said that when it comes to Ukraine, there's no daylight between the intentions of the outgoing and the incoming administrations. What are we to make of that? The Biden administration greenlit the long-range missiles fired into Russia. The Biden administration has just promised more money, billions of dollars of more money for Ukraine. If Trump still wants peace, how can there be no daylight between his intentions and those of the Anthony Blinkens and Lindsey Grahams of this world? It's not as if Ukraine is the only scene of bloodshed involving the US either. And so then there's Trump's pick for ambassador to Israel, former Arkansas Governor Mick Huckabee. When it comes to seeking peace in the Middle East, it's worth remembering what Huckabee has said in the past in relation to that part of the world. In a 2017 interview with CNN, he said, quote, "There is no such thing as a West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria." So, evangelical Christian Huckabee prefers to use the biblical names for those places. Quote, "There's no such thing as a settlement. Their communities, their neighbourhoods, their cities. There's no such thing as an occupation." Huckabee has even questioned Palestinian identity. In the past, he has said, there's really no such thing as a Palestinian. Which is interesting, by the by, if you listen to Golda Meir, Prime Minister of Israel from 1969 to 1974.
East and West Bank was Palestine. I'm a Palestinian. From 21 until 48, I carried a Palestinian passport.
Trump's pick for Secretary of Defence, Pete Hegseth, has offered this vision for Temple Mount in Jerusalem in 2018.
2017, the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible.
But when, I ask, if the proposed administration has a multiple personality disorder, I mean, exactly what is it likely Trump has in mind if we seek to judge by his choices so far? When last we heard Trump speak about the war in Ukraine, he was still talking about peace. Around him gathered voices, some voices echoing similar sentiments, long-held sentiments. Here's Robert Kennedy Jr. speaking a year ago.
Peace comes from a changed attitude. At the bottom of the war mentality, that casts the world into a drama of enemies and threats and lies a debased view of human nature. When you see humans as fundamentally selfish and whole nations as fundamentally evil, then all you have available to change their behavior is threats and bribes. Peace comes from a different place. It starts by seeing within others and within ourselves that which is not selfish, but is brave and generous and idealistic and has good intentions. And I'm not saying that we should ignore the base elements of human nature or the dangers of the world. But if that's all that we see, and we're going to be stuck forever in the mentality of war, and that's where the military-industrial complex wants to keep us. And we will reap forever its poisonous fruits. Our military forces are committed to peace and disciplined in self-restraint. Our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility. End quote. The current administration is going to be in power for another year and a half, but the danger of reckless escalation and nuclear brinksmanship is real and present. I therefore call on our present leadership to adopt President Kennedy's maxims and to start de-escalating right now.
RFK spoke there about the need to avoid purely rhetorical hostility. But in recent days, with the clock ticking down to the Trump inauguration, we heard his pick for counter-terrorism chief Seb Gorka sound pretty rhetorically hostile towards the Russian president.
To that murderous former KGB colonel, that thug who runs the Russian Federation, you will negotiate now, or the aid that we have given to Ukraine thus far will look like peanuts.
I'm always troubled when I hear warmongering from people who've never fought one, like Seb Gorka. It was a British general who said that even among those who have served, those who have known actual direct fire combat is an exclusive club. We have them in Britain too, of course, those ready to send other mothers' sons to war. A few months ago, Tulsi Gabbard, Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence, sounded like a calming voice, an anti-war voice, perhaps.
Because as a soldier now for over 21 years, I've deployed to multiple war zones in different parts of the world, put my life on the line for the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. So it's important to me and to every one of my brothers and sisters in uniform that we have a commander-in-chief who values every one of our lives, who carries that responsibility as commander-in-chief very seriously, and will therefore exhaust all diplomatic avenues before seeing war truly as a last resort. President Trump showed through his last administration, not only did he not start any new wars, he took action to prevent them by courageously meeting with adversaries, allies, partners, dictators. He would meet with whoever he needed to pursue peace.
These days, of all days, it seems vital to ask, in particular, whether it's to be peace in Ukraine or just more war, more killing. On the one hand, Trump has as his vice president J.D. Vance.
We cannot take American values and force them on people who don't want them. Ladies and gentlemen, get America out of Ukraine. Get American troops out of Ukraine. It is a disaster for this country. But let's not mistake the courage of the Ukrainian troops on the ground with the fact that they have the most corrupt leadership and corrupt government in Europe, and maybe the most corrupt leadership anywhere in the world. Can any person here, I'm a U.S. Senator, and I don't know the answer to this question, where have the $130 billion that we spend in Ukraine, where have they gone? We don't know. It hasn't been properly tracked, and when U.S. senators and congressmen try to find out the answer, the Biden administration shuts us down.
This week, President Biden pardoned his son, Hunter, for everything all the way back to 2014, the year of the US coup, conveniently taking in all that time he spent funneling money out of Ukraine and into the Biden family bank account. How long have we known about how much the US elites and transnational corporations like BlackRock have been invested in Ukraine? How long have we known the war in Ukraine is not about democracy, but about massive, obscene profit? Biden, or someone working Biden like a sock puppet, not only gave permission for Ukraine to launch long-range missile attacks against Russia, but to send another $24 billion to the laundromat there. Earlier in the same speech, J.D. Vance talked about the disastrous consequences of the war in Iraq. He pointed out there were no consequences for those who made some of the biggest mistakes in US foreign policy history. He sounded, when he made that speech, like someone who wanted his country to embark upon a different path. Since the signing of its National Security Act in 1947, the US has brought about regime change in literally scores of countries around the world. Estimates as high as 85 countries, depending on what you read. Countries that don't play ball with the United States tend, mysteriously, to implode and collapse shortly thereafter. On and on it goes. After Iraq and the grisly execution of Saddam Hussein and 1 million dead civilians, after Libya and the brutal execution of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, after the push to oust Bashar al-Assad in Syria by the US-funded ISIS terrorists, after the US-led coup in Ukraine in 2014 and the placement there of puppet presidents submissive to Washington, after the collapse of country after country whose rulers defied the hegemony of the US petrodollar, a voice like Vance's certainly sounded like one intent on a change of tack. Wiser heads than mine are asking some of the same questions. This week, Colonel Douglas McGregor, retired fighting man and advisor to the last Trump administration, had this to say.
Which is about a surprise, is I'm shocked that Trump has said nothing. President Trump said, well, I could end this war in 24 hours. Well, that was never true. Nothing starts or ends in 24 hours, let's be frank. However, he had said that he wanted peace in the region. I've been waiting for him to stand up and say, look, I don't want this war. I did not start this war, and my interest is in ending this war. And as soon as I am in office, I will take steps to meet with the Russians to discuss this. I will host a conference involving all of Russia, Russia's neighbors, as well as the Russian leadership, and we'll come to an amicable solution if there is one. But we must end this war. Remember that one of the things that he said early on, which I very much appreciated, was he said, I want the killing to stop. Well, what does he want now? He's saying nothing. Yet people who are allegedly going to be working for him, people he's selected for appointment, have been saying things. The real question is, what does President Trump ultimately stand for? What does he want to accomplish? He has been, on the whole, on record as saying he wants to end this war in Ukraine. Good. He's also said on many occasions that he would like to have better relations with the Russians. Good. All of a sudden, we hear nothing of it. He is actually in a position as the president-elect to simply make it clear. Take a trip downstairs from the second floor or third floor in Mar-a-Lago, walk up to the microphone. There are hundreds of people waiting to hear what he has to say and say, look, I didn't start this. I didn't sign up for this. I want this to end. And I am here to ask President Biden to refrain from any further actions that could jeopardize our attempts to reach an agreement with the Russians in the next term. There's nothing wrong with that. That's completely legitimate. That is not an attack on Biden. That's a simple state of the facts. But that hasn't happened. And so a lot of us are left wondering, where are we headed? Have we all been fooled and bamboozled? Are we actually on the road to another term of irrationality in foreign and defense policy? I don't know.
For now, according to Colonel McGregor and others, no one in Washington is willing to take Russia seriously. Even with the Ukrainian army collapsing for want of men, maybe 1 million dead, with Russia having shown it has hypersonic missile technology that means it doesn't necessarily even need the nuclear option to cause all the destruction required, the Biden administration is ignoring all of that. And yet now we have Mike Waltz saying on Trump's behalf, apparently, that there's no daylight between them. Listen to Colonel McGregor.
Everyone that is on the list of appointments or nominations, whichever, should shut up. This is not a time for them to speak for the president. And listening to Waltz and Gorka is very disturbing. The president hasn't said anything. Is the president interested in saying something? Does the president want this to happen? Does he want these people to make what I consider to be very incautious and dangerous, imprudent statements that could lead to catastrophe in the future? Does he think this is part of a game that's being played to mislead his opponents as well as his friends?
Among the things Trump has said since winning the election is that he plans to tariff his way out of all of America's problems. apparently to make America great again by just another variation on the bullying and coercion of old. What identity does Trump intend America to have? Which of the voices around him, if any, is he listening to? Is it to be peace in Ukraine or war with Russia? Are tariffs really the best move? Or is that all you've got, short of more war? When China, the biggest economy, is moving away from involvement with the US anyway, arguably doesn't need the US or the dollar anymore.
I think we have to finally believe what people tell us. And what Waltz is telling us, what Gorka is telling us, and potentially others from whom we haven't heard yet. I'm sure Senator Rubio, if he ends up in the State Department, which I suspect he will, there's no daylight between him and his predecessor, Blinken, in terms of what our interests are and what we want to see happen in the Middle East. So if that's true, I think everything right now is temporary. Everything is a temporary pause, if you will. In some cases, because of mutual exhaustion, which is true in southern Lebanon, it's true in Israel. And in other cases, because everyone is waiting to find out if their worst fears are realized and nothing of substance changes, or that they'll be surprised by the appearance of a Renaissance man in the White House. We would certainly welcome that, but we haven't seen much evidence for it lately.
So, which is it to be? What personality will Trump's second term have? More of the same or Renaissance man?
The world has changed. We are not adapting. And our only response seems to be to bully, bribe, or bomb. Bully, bribe, bomb.
If the proposed administration has had a multiple personality disorder so far, then we better find out soon which one has the upper hand.